Dr. Tyler here with six-time world long drive champion Jason Zuback. Talk to you a little bit about the importance of the vertical torque or the rotational capacities of a player in a golf swing. Now, golf swing we look at and think of as this incredibly rotational sport, and it is, right? Our body has to be able to create some of those rotations away from the target, towards the target, and when those occur and when they peak and how much a player can produce is really important. And what we often see in a lot of golfers is that they tend to produce that vertical torque in ways that aren't going to help them utilize that lower body to initiate the rotation that we want in the swing. Now, when I step in the app, there's a couple great places where I can look at this. So I'm looking at the vertical torque curve right here. And anytime this curve is negative, it signifies that that player is kind of rotating or creating motion away from the target. And what we're really looking at is when does this player start to create that motion that's rotated towards the target?
Correct.
Now, players that you're working with, Jason, things you're looking at, these high-level players, when do they start to create that rotation that starts going towards the target, or positive vertical torque?
Right. This is going to seem really strange, but the best players in the world, and when we look at the fastest players in the world, they actually start this positive rotation early in the backswing, if you can believe it. We're actually creating this, this momentum in the backswing, this negative rotation, obviously, because we need to rotate in the backswing to load, but the best players and the fastest players start this positive early, and it's kind of around that P2, so where the club shaft is parallel to the ground, or just after that. And the fastest players in the world, they'll even start slightly before that.
Wow. And I've looked at a lot of high-level players as well, as I've kind of done some of my own coaching. And that same thing kind of happens, I see it maybe a little bit later, but it's for sure occurring earlier than what we see. So here's an example I think that you'll see in a lot of players, amateur players, where you can see that his curve is not going positive until he kind of almost finishes that backswing. Now, he's got to, like you said, he's got to kind of stop that negative kind of momentum, the rotation going back. And so what I actually did on this player is I actually grabbed an impulse value, which impulse is basically just the amount of torque he's applying and how long he's applying it for. We get a lot of amateur golfers that they spend so much time turning away from the target that they create such a large impulse that it's going to take a very long time to overcome that, and it's almost impossible for them to create that rotation towards the target. So here's a player where if you look at these impulse values on the side, he actually created a negative impulse value that was equal to 20 units, and of positive impulse, by the time he gets to peak here at arm parallel on the downswing, he's only at about 10 units of torque. So much more negative torque impulse than positive torque impulse, and that's that player who's really away from the target, and they just can't kind of get things going towards the target.
Right, and we see, with whatever force or even the torques we're looking at, the best players in the world, and generally, and for sure the fastest players in the world, they produce higher magnitudes of force, but they produce force or torque longer.
Yep.
And what that translates into is, potentially club head speed down the line, right?
For sure. And I'm going to show you just one more quick place so we can see this in the app, which is actually, if you look under the yellow force vector, you can see that when that circle is dark, it signifies a rotational torque that's pointed away from the target, or a vertical torque that would be negative. Once that starts to go kind of into that whitish and get bigger, you can see the size, you can see when it changes from kind of that negative to the positive, and we want that to occur earlier on. Now, again, because we're going to see a lot of players that struggle with this, I think it's important that we understand if they do have the capacity to kind of go through some of the things that we would training-wise, taking them through a drill progression that you would use to help them improve the timing of when this vertical torque goes positive.
Now, in looking at creating early positive torque, we need a drill progression. And this one is a preparatory drill to help the player understand what this early positive torque feels like before we ever have a golf club in their hand. And it's a great one to feel what we're doing in the feet. Now with this one, it's imperative that we have mobility in the pelvis and thorax, and especially the ability to disassociate pelvis from thorax. Because if the player's not able to do that, it'll make this virtually impossible. But again, if we don't have any physical limitations, we're going to give this a shot. And it's a preparatory drill to help the player feel what we're doing at the feet. So this one, the name of this is early positive torque hip lead helicopter. It's one I developed years ago to help with sequencing in the golf swing in creating some TPI programs. So this one, we get the player to stand just in their normal posture with the driver or 5-iron, and I get them with their hands out to the side. So this is our helicopter position. And I get them rotating back and forth, just like a helicopter. What I want is just to feel that rotation. But when we start back at a particular time, what I want them to feel is a big push towards 10:30 on the clock of the lead foot and towards 4:30 of the trail heel. So I'm trying to drive my trail heel back at that 4:30 position on the clock and drive that lead foot forward to 10:30 as I'm going backwards. It's going to look something like this. Again, just normal rotation. Now, as I start to go back, I try to exert that force with the lead foot and the trail. We can see that as indicated in the circle going from dark to light. That will show that transition from negative torque to positive. Now, if we do the drill as well, we can see graphically what we're doing with producing force, AP force. So again, we're going like a helicopter. Then as I start back on this one, I'm gonna try to drive that lead foot forward at that 10:30 position, and the trail, I'm trying to drive that back at that 4:30 position. And we'll see that graphically, what will happen within the feet. Next in our series, following the hip lead helicopter, our preparatory drill sequence for early positive torque. Now we're gonna put a club in the player's hands just so we have that crossover to the actual golf swing. So in this drill, we're gonna do a series of swings, and as we take the club back, as we pass where the golf ball would be, I want the lead foot to push at 10:30 aggressively and the trail foot to push to 4:30 aggressively at the same time as we take the club back, as passing the position of the golf ball. It's going to look something like this. Next in our series is a drill where we're going to utilize the force pedal. Now we're going to position the force pedal in a way that's going to help us to create rotation, but to create rotation from the exact point of application that we need to be the most efficient. So again, we have our player stand as they normally would. I'm going to take orange force pedal and position that in the middle of the trail foot towards the heel. So slightly towards the heel. And I'll take the yellow force pedal, position that to the ball of the lead foot. Now, just as we had done in the wedge series of this, we're going to do a series of swings forward and back. But what we're keying on is when the club passes where the golf ball would be, I still want that aggressive push to 10:30 on the clock and 4:30 with the trail. So 10:30 with the lead foot, 4:30 on the trail. It's going to look something like this. In this one, we're not going to use any implements, just as we would our normal stance. And again, it's a series of swings in a row. But what I'm trying to capitalize on, as the club passes where the golf ball would be, I'm going to have a simultaneous push of the lead foot towards that 10:30 position on the clock and that trail foot to the 4:30 position to create the forces in the feet at that foot ground interface to affect rotation early.
Jason, that was an awesome progression to really focus on the importance of getting that vertical torque to go positive as early as possible, right? We see a lot of golfers who struggle to not utilize those legs to create that rotation, and instead it's kind of an upper body dominant rotation. And so one key thing you can look at is on the plates, when does that vertical torque go from negative to positive, and the drills you just outlined were wonderful to help golfers work on that.
Definitely. That, one way to really kill this early positive vertical is, what we call a TPI, this, backswing loading. The player tries to make this huge, turn in the backswing, and they just keep that negative torque happening. But, as we see in the fastest players in the world, it starts early, they get that bigger impulse, and potentially the ability to translate that into more energy and more speed in the swing.
Yep, and when you're working on these, again, the idea is to do a lot of these over the period of time, right? So being able to do these sets where you're piecing together maybe 3 to 5 sets of these, taking little breaks in between to give your mind a little bit of time to rest, trying to relearn these maybe new movement patterns, we could say. And really doing them frequently. Okay, working with a coach if you have one, and they may progress some things that way also.
Absolutely.